Hello and welcome to today's SCDN Policy Connection, tracking federal policy shifts and funding opportunities for sustainable initiatives. My name is John Ukenya, and I am the Senior Director of Policy and Strategic Initiatives at Sustainable Pittsburgh. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and these materials will be shared after today's program. Please submit any questions via the Q&A box and we'll answer at the end. Feel free to also enter your name and organization into the chat so people know who's in attendance. As always, we strive to create a welcoming environment for all participants and encourage everyone to engage with respect and courtesy. Constructive discussions and diverse perspectives are valued, and we ask that all interactions remain professional and considerate. By participating in this webinar, you are helping to foster a positive experience where everyone can learn and contribute meaningfully. Next slide, please. At Sustainable Pittsburgh, our mission is to empower decision-making that builds a fundamentally equitable, resilient, healthy, and prosperous region. We are doing that through connecting our stakeholders and networks we host, such as the Sustainable Community Development Network, SCDN, to share knowledge of sustainability through resources and experiences to help make a region where all people may succeed. Sustainable Pittsburgh is committed to building the knowledge, perspective, and ability needed to create a better tomorrow for our region. We're optimistic, having worked with nearly 1,000 businesses, communities, and organizations to take action using our customized frameworks to track progress and simultaneously advance social equity, environmental stewardship, and prosperity. The strategic networks we host leverage the collective expertise and diverse perspectives within our region to ensure our communities can meet our challenges today and thrive into the future. That is why we've invited you all today to attend as part of our Sustainable Communities Development Network, to learn together so that we can act together. And together is how we co-create a fundamentally equitable, resilient, healthy, and prosperous region. Next slide, please. We would like to thank our silver sponsor, Pitt, Ohio, for their support of Sustainable Pittsburgh to make programs like this possible. Next slide. And we'd also like to extend our gratitude to our bronze sponsors for their ongoing support. For our agenda today, we're going to start with a quick overview of Sustainable Pittsburgh's recognition programs. These are frameworks for municipalities, businesses, and other organizations to track and measure sustainability progress. Next, we'll get into an introduction on today's topic. Then we'll hear from Zealand Hoover of the Environmental Protection Network, who will provide a broad perspective on the current state of federal funding, accessible to municipalities through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. He'll offer an update on where things stand for municipalities that receive federal funding for such projects, highlighting key relevant grants and opportunities. Next, we'll hear from Annabelle Rosser of Atlas Public Policy, who will discuss the state of direct pay projects. She'll provide insights into where the tax credits currently stand and introduce the tools Atlas Public Policy offers, such as their direct pay tracker and storytelling resources. Lastly, we'll come back for a Q&A session with all of our speakers. As a reminder, please use the Q&A box for any questions you may have. I will now pass it over to my colleague, Sawyer Seidlinger, who will talk us through Sustainable Pennsylvania and our recognition programs.
Thanks, John. So today I'll be sharing a little bit more about our Sustainable Pittsburgh's recognition programs. We currently have 4 programs, 3 for businesses in the southwestern Pennsylvania 10-county region, Sustainable Pittsburgh Shops, tailored for small retail businesses, Sustainable Pittsburgh Restaurants, suited for food businesses, Sustainable Pittsburgh Workplace, a catch-all for all of those that are not restaurants or shops. In addition to those 3 programs, we also have Sustainable Pennsylvania, a program created for municipalities across the state. More generally, each of these programs offer a step-by-step process to track and measure sustainability progress, as well as they are a framework that organizations can use to drive measurable impact while providing recognition for their sustainability achievements. Programs are based on best practices and have been peer-reviewed by knowledge experts. Programs are fluid and change based on needs, opportunity in landscape, and opportunity for impacts. Recognition comes in the form of bronze, silver, gold, and platinum levels of designation or certification. They are based on overall sustainability performance and determined by completing an online assessment through the unique portal offered by Sustainable Pittsburgh. To date, participation includes over 400 businesses, organizations, and municipalities, and dozens more working through the process. As many of you are representative of the municipal audience, I'll share a bit more about the Sustainable Pennsylvania Certification Program. Managed by Sustainable Pittsburgh in partnership with the Pennsylvania Municipal League, the program offers strategies, resources, and recognition to municipalities for improving quality of life and expanding opportunities for everyone. It covers a comprehensive set of sustainability topics and provides step-by-step guidance for how your community can advance its performance in areas such as waste, materials management, economic development and revitalization, parks and land conservation, as well as several other topics that can help build a more resilient and vibrant community. Spanning across the state, we currently have 139 municipalities that have earned Sustainable Pennsylvania certification, touching over 4 million Pennsylvania residents. The Sustainable Pennsylvania program offers several benefits. First and foremost, it can help you baseline your municipality's current sustainability performance, as well as serve as an action plan for advancing your efforts. To help you advance your progress, the program also offers resources, tools, and best practices developed by over 60 advisors. Getting certified helps your community be recognized as a leader in sustainability. And once certified, you will receive a promotional kit, which includes a badge for your website, job posting, or other uses, and a press release template. We'll also share your achievement through Sustainable Pittsburgh's communication channels. The Sustainable Pennsylvania website also provides your municipality with municipal profile for you to use to help inform your residents about what actions you've taken as a municipality to further your sustainability journey. Lastly, and some might think most importantly, Sustainable Pennsylvania certification is also recognized on the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development's municipal funding applications, which can help a funding application stand out through clear demonstration of sustainability commitments and increasing your chance of approval for those grant opportunities. There are just 4 steps to getting certified. First, you need to create an account. Right now, if you can pull out your phone and take and use your camera to capture the QR code and follow that link. You'll scroll down to the communities option and you'll fill out the page and click sign up. Once you have an account, the next step is to answer the questions in the program. The program takes the form of an online assessment, and the questions are customized for municipalities. You can work with a team of colleagues to complete this, which would be a great way to help organize a sustainability team at your municipality, which is actually one of the actions. Third, after you complete your assessment, submit it. Our staff will provide feedback on your responses, and you will have the chance to address before submitting your final answers. Last, you'll earn bronze, silver, gold, or platinum certification based on 2 criteria: the total percentage of possible points you've earned and whether you've completed the actions required for each level. There's no deadline to participate, and certifications expire every 3 years. Now I'll pass it back to my colleague, John, to continue on with the rest of this program. Thanks.
Thank you, Sawyer. We're excited to have you all join us today for our discussion, tracking federal policy shifts and funding opportunities for sustainable initiatives. So why are we focusing on this now? At Sustainable Pittsburgh, supporting local sustainability efforts remains a core priority, especially as the federal landscape continues to evolve. There is much uncertainty, from federal funding across the board allocated for the state being in flux to new executive orders and pending legislation continuing to impact federal support for sustainability initiatives. This session will provide an overview of current federal policies and their impact on municipalities and partner organizations aiming to advance sustainable development efforts. Our speakers will share strategies for navigating existing federal funding streams and adapting to the evolving regulations that impact sustainability projects. Today's discussion is an opportunity to explore how municipalities and organizations can make the most of available funding, adapt to new federal policies, and continue driving sustainability efforts in our communities. So, without further ado, let's dive into the latest federal policy shifts and funding opportunities that will empower our region to build a more sustainable, resilient future. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Zealand. Zealand Hoover served as a senior advisor to the administrator and the director of implementation for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency from 2021 to 2025. In that capacity, he managed the deployment of over $100 billion in new infrastructure and Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, investments to thousands of climate and environmental projects across the country, with more than 60% of that funding focused on disadvantaged communities. Hoover previously served as a policy advisor in the White House during the Obama administration. He graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Welcome, Zealand.
Thank you, John, and thank you for convening this group. It's so important at times like this when the situation is changing so rapidly to be able to share the latest in developments. As John said in my introduction, until January of 2025, I was at the Environmental Protection Agency, where I had the opportunity to lead implementation of programs authorized under the Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And since January, I have been helping local communities navigate all of these changes in support of the Environmental Protection Network and a federal funds protection initiative that EPN, Lawyers for Good Government, and NRDC are collaborating on. So if we move forward to the next slide, I want to start by just explaining a little more context about what the Federal Fund Safeguarding Initiative is and how it can potentially support your community if you are working on a federal grant that may be facing certain compliance risks or adversarial actions at this moment. So anytime there's a change in administration, folks have to pivot. There's obviously a lot more change afoot right now than there has been in the past. We also are seeing the current administration take very sweeping efforts to terminate grants that they do not view as aligned with their policy priorities. And in a moment, I will walk through a high-level summary of what has happened over the first 100 days. However, what I want to start with is to say that there are resources available to grantees to help in this moment. So the Federal Fund Safeguarding Initiative is a pro bono effort of the Lawyers for Good Government, the Environmental Protection Network, and NRDC with partners including Communities First. And the goal is to provide federal award grantees with three things. First, education. So understanding what the financial and programmatic compliance requirements are, helping grantees navigate all of these fast-moving changes. Two, direct assistance with inbound requests, be it from your project officer, the Inspector General's office, a congressional committee. Also, this will cover things such as referrals to pro bono attorneys if you are facing adversarial actions such as termination, and also connections with partners to provide crisis communication support and government relations support. So again, the best defense for any grant program is to do good work and solve problems. And we want to make sure that grantees have what they need to do that they are constantly staying in compliance with all of the myriad federal rules and regulations, especially as those are changing rapidly. And for any grantees that are facing particular scrutiny or oversight, that they have partners to navigate that. So again, if you are working on a grant, either as the direct grant recipient or as a subawardee, you can go to the Lawyers for Good Government website. There's an intake form there. That is the front door for receiving pro bono services through this coalition. So please do come in. There are several hundred organizations that we are working with at this moment. So let's move forward to the next page, and I want to provide a overview of what has happened in the first 100 days of the Trump administration. There has been a lot of executive orders and memoranda and legal cases. The right-hand side of this page tries to distill it down to the most important developments while not trying to capture all of the tactical back and forth. So shortly after taking office, President Trump signed multiple executive orders. Some of these were around energy and environmental issues. Some of these were on around diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of them directed agencies to freeze grants and contracts pending a review, and to terminate grants not considered to be consistent with the new administration's policy priorities. This was the first major funding freeze in the largest in terms of impacted grants and programs. So back in February, almost all, if not every single grant that EPA administered under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act was frozen. And there were similarly sweeping freezes in effect at other agencies. That meant many tens of billions of dollars in programs were suddenly in limbo. The effects were far-reaching and immediate. The unintended consequences were significant. And so pretty quickly, the scope of that freeze narrowed. There also was a raft of lawsuits by Democratic states attorney general, by nonprofit groups, by tribes, asserting their various legal rights under their grants to draw down their funds, and their rights to due process in any sort of adverse action. And so later in February, after several back and forth judicial orders, the freezes on many but not all grants were lifted. Overlapping with that, the new Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, began their own review of federal spending across a number of agencies, and have been taking a number of unilateral actions to terminate staff, programs, contracts, grants. That has taken a different form at different agencies. So a bit out of our scope, but most significantly was the functionally complete dismantling of the U.S. Agency for International Development. At EPA, they canceled a number of contracts and have been developing a list of grants that they are seeking to terminate. As I mentioned, there have been a lot of lawsuits filed, and in a moment I will go into more detail on the latest state of active lawsuits. No need to tick through every single one that has taken place to date. But if you look at where we are right now after all of that, at EPA, out of the $100 billion in bill and IRA funds that were authorized by Congress, about $70 billion was deployed onto grants and contracts and payroll during the Biden administration. Of that $70 billion, there's about $23 billion right now, where EPA is seeking to terminate the grants and funds are currently frozen. That falls into two main buckets. There's the $20 billion Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is frozen, and they have also frozen every active grant in the Office of Environmental Justice, which is several hundred grants totaling about $3 billion. There's also similar reviews and frozen funds across other agencies and sustainability programs. So DOE, lots of variation across offices in terms of what is frozen and not frozen. the Department of Agriculture. They have been going through and seeking to terminate a number of grants that have sustainability and environmental components to them. Next page, please. So the good news is there are a lot of environmental grants that do continue to move forward at that moment. In Pennsylvania, that includes the nearly $400 million climate pollution reduction grant for industrial decarbonization that is being implemented by the State Department of Environment and will be funding hundreds of industrial decarbonization projects of all sizes. And you may have seen the press when Governor Shapiro announced that grant in the Pittsburgh area about a year ago. For the State Solar for All program, that is a $156 million statewide program to deploy to employ solar and storage on low-income households. That is particularly exciting because the program has to decrease household electricity bills by at least 20%. So it dovetails nicely, not just with environmental goals, but also with this administration's continued focus on affordability and reducing household costs. And then water infrastructure programs through the state revolving funds continue to move forward. There's a separate issue on the regulatory side regarding the future of the lead and copper rule, but fortunately the dollars that have been allocated to Pennsylvania and other states for projects like lead service line removal continue to move forward. The bad news is that at least 6 EPA grants to local communities in Pennsylvania, including a grant to Allegheny County and a grant to McKeesport, are on a list of planned terminations. And the $20 billion in EPA grants through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is to national partners that had and have significant plans to make investments of that funding in projects in Western Pennsylvania. And so a lot is riding on the court cases there challenging those attempted terminations. And then, of course, across the board, all projects are going to face, unfortunately, major cost pressure and supply chain disruptions due to all of the tariffs that we are seeing. And of course, that is not a challenge unique to federal grants, but federal grants have less flexibility in terms of their budgets. And so we'll see how that plays out. Next page, please. So as I mentioned, there have been a lot of lawsuits and legal actions. More are coming. Of the ones that are underway, these are the main relevant lawsuits to federal investments in the environmental space right now. So first, 22 state attorneys in DC filed a suit in Rhode Island early on against the funding freeze. That resulted in a preliminary injunction that the federal government must unpause IRA and IIJA funding in those 22 states in DC. Unfortunately, that does not cover Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania's Attorney General did not join that suit. However, the arguments that are being made there and the back and forth to the appellate court and potentially to the Supreme Court are dispositive for future legal challenges. Second, there was a preliminary injunction against the DEI order that was brought related to the termination of certain grants at the Department of Education. And the preliminary injunction said that the Department of Education cannot terminate, certify, or prosecute based off of DEI at all agencies. Unfortunately, that very robust preliminary injunction was subsequently stayed by the appeals court, which was a setback, but it remains to be seen how that plays out. This is important because the executive orders around diversity, equity, and inclusion are being used as a justification for terminating a number of grants. There are also pending cases to unfreeze funding at the Department of Agriculture, and another requested preliminary injunction unfreeze funding for several EPA, energy, transportation, and USDA grants that remain frozen. So lots of litigation, fast moving, dynamic. This is another reason why if you are a grantee who is caught up in all of this, I strongly encourage you to plug into the EPN L4GG effort so that you can get real-time updates on how all of this is playing out and what it means for you. Next page, please. So I'm going to wrap up by just talking a bit about how you can help. I'm going to emphasize Earth Day because it is coming up so soon, but everything on this page is evergreen. So the best thing to do is to demonstrate strong, robust support for these programs. The same goes for the tax credits that you'll hear about in a moment. Earth Day this year happens to fall at a time when members of Congress will be in their district, representatives are in their district. From tomorrow through April 25th, senators will be in state from April 22nd to 26th. So this is an opportunity to collaborate with your elected officials on an Earth Day event. If you have an elected official who's not particularly supportive of these issues, that's okay. There's two options. One is you can request a meeting or invite them to do a closed press, i.e. no reporters there, site visit. If you're a grantee, to show the work that you're doing, to try to persuade them to support your work. And of course, you can also do your own events with allies. There's going to be a lot of interest by the press in writing stories around Earth Day, covering these issues. So it's a good hook to talk about the importance of federal funding in Western Pennsylvania. And then, of course, letters to your elected officials are important. Letters encouraging them to support the tax credits and the ongoing budget discussions. Letters asking them to support grants that are of critical importance to the region are valuable. If you do an event that generates favorable press, you can follow up and send them those press clips as well. So the legal forum is an important place to be pushing the legal rights the grantees have under their existing contracts. However, it is just as important to continue to build the base of support and to make sure that elected officials understand how important these programs are to their constituents and take that into consideration. So I encourage you all to build this into your plans for April. And like I said, I'm stressing Earth Day because that is a good hook, but these are evergreen suggestions that you can take advantage of at any time. So with that, it has been a pleasure to talk, and I will pass it to back to you, John.
Thank you, Zealand.
And sorry, one last thing there is just for when this goes out, a whole list of resources available to keep track of all the grants and all the work underway. Thanks, John.
Thank you. So next, we will be introducing Annabelle. Annabelle Rosser is a senior policy analyst at Atlas Public Policy, where she contributes to original research and analysis on public investments in water and climate infrastructure. She manages products like the Water Program Portal and the Climate Program Portal, two tools that track the implementation of federal funding for water and climate infrastructure. She also works closely with the Atlas team to develop new analytical tools for the environmental policy community. So without further ado, welcome, Annabelle.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here today. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about direct pay, leading up to a new tool that Atlas launched last week on the Climate Program Portal for the Local Government Direct Pay Tracker. With that, we can go to the next slide. So for those of you who might not be aware, what is direct pay? Direct pay, also commonly referred to as elective pay, is a new mechanism that was created by the Inflation Reduction Act. And it lets non-tax-paying entities, generally like local governments, cities and counties, school districts, nonprofits, churches, etc., get access to some of the tax credits that were made available by the Inflation Reduction Act. Before this new payment mechanism, those entities were not able to directly receive these tax credits because they didn't file taxes like you would if you were a private company or a private citizen. They can be used to access most Inflation Reduction Act clean energy tax credits, though not all of them. Many of the ones we've seen being taken up by direct pay include the clean energy tax, the ITC and PTC clean energy tax credits, as well as the EV tax credit and EV charging tax credit. Next slide. So shifting gears a little bit from that wonderful presentation covering kind of the landscape of federal grants, particularly the last few months, direct pay is not a federal grant, and so it has been impacted very differently by the recent funding freeze. Tax credits are not grants. They're different types of spending. They're non-discretionary and they're enshrined in statutory law. And so we've seen filings continue to be processed as normal. This is really good news for folks who have been using direct pay to support their projects and have been filing end of last year into this year. Obviously, we, as well as our partners in this space, are going to continue to monitor the status of these filings, but so far they have been continued to be processed. We have a few recommendations for folks if they have filed here. Most of this comes from guidance that's been put out by Lawyers for Good Government. But generally, if you're interested, there's IRS office hours that happen periodically. The next office hours are in April. And then there's a few different ways that you can check the status of your filing if you've already filed for direct pay. The first is a secure messaging tool. Second's an email. And the third is there's a couple of different phone numbers. The 1-800 number here is the official phone number, but L4GG has been hearing from folks that the 1-877 has also been helpful, and you will often reach somebody who's maybe more familiar with direct and elective pay. Next slide. First and foremost, I think we want to make people to understand how the law does protect direct pay recipients. So while there have not been issues to date with processing, if you filed or if you're thinking about filing and using direct pay to support a project, understandably, I think folks want to know what would happen if their payment is delayed. If they have recourse, what sort of protections are in place. So in February, Lawyers for Good Government put out some official guidance about how to track your status and some actions that could potentially be taken in the case that your payment is delayed. This is mostly just staying on top of things in case that happens, but there's a few key steps here that I think are important if you filed or are thinking about filing. Their guidance has shared that the IRS will send you a letter if there's some sort of problem with your filing. And so look out for that communication with the IRS. They've said that it's very vital to respond within the time window provided. And then if no letter has been received, again, it's good to just check on the status of your return. Again, this 1-877 number is a good point of contact at the IRS that is more familiar with direct pay issues. And then to cover your bases, it's important to have proof that you mailed your return and that the IRS received your return. If you want more information, more details about all of this, I recommend going to the guidance that I just sent in the chat and following up with them and visiting their website for updates. Last but not least, there is the ability to sue to enforce payment of credits already claimed if there's a circumstance where the IRS refuses to pay. We've not necessarily seen this happen yet, but that's always available as a recourse. All right, next slide. Aside from the sort of short-term legal recourses that folks have available if they filed or are thinking about filing for direct pay this year, how do we protect direct pay in the long term, and what kind of threats are underway this year? Next slide. So like I mentioned, there are some short-term legal protections. Direct pay is really only changeable through legislation or regulations, and any sort of regulatory changes are likely cannot get rid of the tax credits or direct pay in their entirety. We don't expect legislative changes to be effective until 2026 if those do pass. Regulatory changes can be sooner, but again, they cannot get rid of the tax credits or direct pay as a function in their entirety. However, if direct pay or the tax credits that direct pay helps people access are done away with legislatively, there's no sort of legal recourse to that. That's the process with which they can be gotten rid of. So if that happens, projects that are constructed in 2025 can still file for direct pay, and we expect that those legislative changes probably won't be effective until 2026. This is something we're monitoring every day, and is a developing situation. But for the most part, if you're doing a project this year and you're trying to use direct pay to cover it, it seems likely that it'll still be available. Aside from the legal side of things, there's a lot of advocacy efforts currently underway to protect direct pay. To support those advocacy efforts, we also encourage folks to continue to file and to tell their stories around direct pay as much as possible. And this is going to lead us to the tracker I'm going to talk about in a second. But advocacy efforts that are happening in congressional offices, in Washington, D.C., in local communities, in the media, particularly around local governments, have been led by mayors advocating for these clean energy tax credits to remain in place and showcasing examples in their communities of where direct pay has made projects possible. The meat that they need to advocate for this process for direct pay and the clean energy tax credits, which are kind of inextricably linked here, is for there to be stories to tell about and for folks to continue to file. So if you have filed, or you know someone who has filed, or you know someone who has a project that has been using direct pay, it's vital to tell that story to the public if possible. And then if you're considering using direct pay, it's a good idea to continue to use this tool and to continue to file. It's a good way to showcase that it's being used, that it provides benefits to communities. And if we don't have projects that are filing, there's not necessarily a local story to tell there. Next slide. So how on earth do we kind of aggregate all of the stories that are happening nationwide in different cities across the country that might not be aware of one another? So this brings us to the new local government direct pay tracker that Atlas launched on Climate Program Portal last Wednesday. This is a tracker we've been developing with many partners, including Climate Mayors, C40, and the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, USDN. We've been reaching out to cities for the last few months to try to collect as many direct pay stories as we can, and then have built an interactive, downloadable live dashboard that will be updated in real time as projects are added to the map to showcase all of these projects in a really clear and accessible way. So why was this important? First and foremost, direct pay and the tax credits are not data that's going to be made publicly available by IRS or Treasury. This is private information, and so the only way really for us to collect this information was from crowdsourcing and voluntary sharing. There's not going to be like a published list somewhere on IRS at any point of projects that are all using direct pay across the country. And so how widespread and popular the program is, how much uptake has happened, is somewhat opaque unless folks self-report that they're using direct pay and tell us how it's helping them do different projects in their communities. So with that, we're also able to get kind of a zoomed out picture about how many projects nationwide are happening, rather than the individual piecemeal stories that are happening in each community. The other nice thing about this tool is that it provides stakeholders with something that's publicly accessible that they can actually download data from and use in their own context. If folks want to explore this tracker, it's currently live and free and open to the public, and you can access it at Climate Program Portal /direct pay tracker. Next slide. So there's a lot of different ways we've sliced and diced the data that we're showing here. The first on that previous slide was by project type. There you can see projects that are supporting solar, geothermal, electric vehicles, and EV charging. We've also geolocated all of the projects that we could by the congressional district. So if you're trying to quickly find projects that are happening in red or blue congressional districts, you can do so via this congressional district tab. Hovering over any of these dots will show you a little card that gives you much more detail about the representative of that in the district that the project's in, as well as the two senators for that state that represent that project. At any point too, the data that's shown on this map is available to download in a table below on the site. Next slide. We've also thought it was important to highlight projects that were taking place in disadvantaged communities. And so this is another version of the data that shows you all of the projects that are happening in disadvantaged communities by the definition provided by the CGES layers. You can also explore energy communities and climate vulnerability, which indicates where projects are in low or high climate vulnerability area. Next slide. All right, so we have at least one project so far that's in the state of Pennsylvania. The city of Philadelphia was able to use the 45W credit for commercial clean vehicles to purchase a fleet of electric passenger vehicles. They purchased these in 2023. We're able to file for just over $1 million in tax credits thanks to the direct pay. They would not have been able to directly get that payment if it were not for direct pay. And this supported a fleet of 130 passenger vehicles for the city and is expected to remove well over 400 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions every year. We hope to see more and more projects like this added to the map. Many might still be in development, but this is also a call to you all that if you know of projects in your state that have used direct pay or in development and plan to use direct pay, please share them with us. Next slide. So going under the hood, what type of information are we looking for from folks? We ask everybody to provide a little bit of information about who owns the project and what type of organization they are. There's a lot of different types of organizations or public agencies that are using direct pay, and it's helpful for us to be able to distinguish between a school district, a city, a county, a town, a nonprofit, a church, etc. Right now, while the dashboard is really focused on showcasing local government projects, we are interested in collecting any direct pay projects that folks are using. So far, most of the projects we've collected have been owned and led by local governments, but as the pool of other owners grows, we'll start adding that to the dashboard as well. We want to know a little bit about the project, what type of a project it is, if it's a renewable energy project, if it's a solar geothermal project, if it's a community solar project. That's all helpful for us to know. We really want to know where the project is. This can sometimes be challenging to share, but it's really helpful for us to know the location of the project so that we can layer it with things like congressional districts, disadvantaged communities, these other spatial layers that are useful to people who use the tracker. Most importantly, we want to know which tax credit was used and if there were bonuses that were used. This helps provide folks with the tools they need to advocate for those specific tax credits if we know that some are more popular than others potentially. It's also helpful for us to know the filing status, especially since we're monitoring whether or not folks are getting their payment and trying to kind of follow up. And then we do ask for the tax credit amount. This is not shared at the individual project level unless it's in like the public record somewhere else. But generally, if this is shared with us via our form, this is not something that's going to be then added to the dashboard publicly. It's used to help generate the top line summary stats. And then lastly, any project metrics that indicate how it's impacted the community are really, really helpful. So there's a couple of specific metrics we ask for, and then some more general community benefits that we ask for in the form. Next slide. Okay, and with that, if anyone has any projects that they can add to the map, you can do so via this Atlas policy link. Let me drop it in the chat really quick. Right now, we're processing new projects as quickly as we can, but they'll definitely be added within 1 working week, if not much sooner. And we've been sharing this data widely with different advocacy efforts working to protect direct pay. So if you're interested in your project or your story helping to preserve and protect this really important and first of its kind mechanism, this is a really great way to very cleanly hand over your story into the right hands. Next slide. Great, thank you all for having me here today. I'll hand it back over to you, John.
Thank you, Annabelle. And also thank you, Zealand. Panelists, if you don't mind turning your cameras back on and join me on screen, and we will begin our Q&A portion of today's webinar. Once again, if you have a question for Sustainable Pittsburgh or any of our speakers here today, please put your questions in the Q&A box. So our first question here is, which Allegheny County grant is on the EPA list of planned terminations?
I will have to go back and check that and follow up offline.
All right.
It is, I believe, it is a government to government grant through the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights, but I don't know the exact grant name.
All right, thank you. Next question is, what is the current status of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund? I know there were several court hearings.
Yes, the lawyers are staying very busy. So there is currently a temporary restraining order in effect that is preventing Citibank from sending the funds back to EPA, and also pausing the agency's attempted terminations. A temporary restraining order is the first step. It is, as the name implies, temporary. The next step would be a preliminary injunction, which would implement the restraining order over a longer period of time while the case is discussed on its merits. The grantees were expecting a preliminary injunction to be issued earlier this week. However, there was a Supreme Court decision on a separate case that the judge wanted some additional time to review, and so the preliminary injunction, or sorry, the temporary restraining order was extended for an additional week, with the expectation that the judge will decide next week on a preliminary injunction. The grantees have requested that any preliminary injunction allow them to draw down funds, because right now under the TRO, even though funds cannot go back to EPA, funds can also not be drawn down by the grantees, and that is having significant impacts on their ability to operate. So the hope is that a preliminary injunction will allow the grantees to continue the operations as outlined under their grants while the case moves forward.
All right, thank you. Next question is, regarding the projects in your clean economy tracker, did they all receive federal funding, or did you include projects that have received only state funding or no funding at all?
Yeah, so I didn't talk much about the clean economy tracker. We really focused on the direct pay tracker. I should have highlighted it a little bit more. I just dropped it in the chat. I encourage everybody to check it out. I think this is a common misconception, but the clean economy tracker only tracks private-led investments, particularly private manufacturing investments in the clean economy. Many of these are spurred by, connected to things like the tax credits and the broader public investments into this part of the economy. But the investments that are tracked on that site are private-led investments. Some of the projects that have private investments have also received federal grants. Many have maybe also received state grants. I believe that CET only will indicate some of the federal investments that have happened. But to answer your question, not all the projects have necessarily received direct federal funding. They have all received private manufacturing investment that may or may not have happened based on the broader investments that have been happening in the clean energy sector, particularly the tax credit. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if it doesn't, the person can also follow up either with another question in the chat or in the Q&A box or via email as well. You'll be receiving the slides and the speaker's contact information as well. Next question is, if they all receive federal funding, would it be possible to list which program helped finance them?
Yes, I think that there is a part of a tab on the Clean Economy Tracker. Via the congressional analysis. Although maybe there isn't. I think we used to have that available, and I think we no longer are highlighting it given the focus on congressional analysis. But let me check with the rest of our team on this tool and see if there's more I can say there. What I will say instead is the quickest way to find the exact program that a site may have gotten federal funding from is actually to explore the climate program portal. The outcomes dashboard on this site surveys and encompasses all federal funding, all public investment into the climate space. So the way that I like to try to differentiate between CPP and CET is that the climate program portal is really focused on private investment, on public investment, and that the Clean Economy Tracker is really focused on private investment. So if there's a site or an estate that you think might have received federal funding, I would go to the climate program portal. I would zoom into that state, and then I would look at the projects that have received funding in that state.
All right, thank you. Next question is there a good list of state grants available currently?
I will say the page in the presentation that lists data sources is the current best compendium of grants, Annabelle, unless you know something else. Unfortunately, there's no one amazing comprehensive list that covers every agency, but several different groups of volunteers have been tracking grants across different agencies. So that is a useful place to go. Grants.gov does allow you to export grants by state. There are two limitations there. One, there is a lag time. So grants that were finalized in the waning days of the Biden administration may not yet show up there. Also, terminations may take several weeks to several months to show up there. The second limitation in a lot of data is tracking subawards. So, of course, if a grant is going to the state or to anyone within the state, that is less of an issue. But of course, there are also national grants that make subawards to local and state partners, and those can be sort of harder to track. But I would start with the list of resources on that page, and grants.gov is also another place to triangulate with.
All right, thank you. Next question we have here is, are EPA awards through appropriation requests like community grants at risk of being terminated?
So in terms of active grants, they fall into three buckets. There's grants that were funded by the Inflation Reduction Act, grants that were funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and grants that were funded under annual appropriations. Legally, there's no difference between those different pots of money. Politically, this administration has seemed to take a more stringent look at programs that were authorized under the Inflation Reduction Act, and also all grants awarded under the Office of Environmental Justice, regardless of how they were funded. So those are the areas that seem to be getting the most scrutiny right now. But again, legally, there's no distinction between whether it's bipartisan infrastructure law funding or base appropriations or IRA funding in terms of ease of termination.
Great, thank you. Next question is, what was the resource mentioned to find more information about grants that may be terminated?
So it is the Environment and Public Works Committee of the Senate released a list. This is an internal list from EPA that a whistleblower sent to them of 400 grants that the agency is apparently seeking to terminate. That's functionally every grant in the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. It is a useful tool to triangulate off of, but it is not the only set of grants that they are trying to terminate. As someone else mentioned, they've been trying to terminate grants in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund program as well. And again, this is just EPA. It is also very difficult to track grant terminations because they don't have to be posted publicly anywhere. And also we've seen them send out termination letters and then withdraw those termination letters, and then in some cases resend termination letters. So there are a lot of people trying to find ways to improve visibility here. I would say that if there are grants that you particularly care about in your community, just stay in close contact with those grantees. They will, of course, know if they've received a termination letter and are going to be the best source of truth there.
We are trying our best to track like official terminations or things that we've deemed as enough like definitive public statement that we can actually say that it's been attempted to be terminated on CPP. This is only for iGen IRA climate grants, and so it's not going to include grants that are maybe funded by general appropriations out of EPA. But the climate program portal outcomes dashboard is one place you can look to see if things have moved to a more like definitive state. This is not going to be that list of 400 grants that Thielen mentioned that I just shared here. Since it's more of like a target list, it's been quite opaque understanding how and if some of the grants that are on that list are being attempted to be terminated or not. And so we are not going to officially like mark them as terminated unless there's more clear information that that's happened or occurred. But it is like a useful list. I linked the heat map article that includes them all in the chat. There's also an initiative called the Impact Project that includes all types of different impacts that have been happening, including federal worker firings. But I think that could potentially be useful. This is primarily built on self-reported data. And we're working with them as they continue to build it out.
All right, thank you. So the next question is, if in scope, I would be interested in hearing more about any state level environmental initiatives, legislation likely to move forward, since likely no movement or backtracking on federal efforts. So it's similar to the question before about the person asked about like state level grants.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't really speak to Pennsylvania state level environmental initiatives and legislation too much. I
don't know if Zealand or Ben wanted to add anything to that.
I think Zealand dropped off.
Okay.
Had to go.
All right, so the next question is to help find those direct pay projects, have you reached out to either project installers or to trade associations of project installers? They would seem to be biased towards supporting and knowing the continued success of this program. Also, actual installers would know if installed projects and forward the tracker info to owners for them to decide to contact the tracker. And I saw you answer this directly, but I don't know if you wanted to maybe share this more publicly.
Yeah, happily. I think this is a great idea. Thank you, Daryl, for sharing it. We, in the initial phase of our data collection, really relied on reaching out directly to cities. And then it became clear to us that like looking through project installer, even like websites and public records examples of direct pay projects that they had installed was a really great resource to crowdsource some of those projects. So we've started doing that more and more. We're also in the process of starting to look into public bid databases that would also give us some leads. We have to do a little bit of legwork to then confirm that those projects did definitely use direct pay. It's likely that they did, but the project installers can't always tell us that. Sometimes we need to hear that. We have to confirm that directly with the project owner, but it's a really helpful lead and something that we're trying to rely on more and more. So I appreciate the suggestion. We haven't reached out as much to trade associations, and so that's a good idea and something that we can explore. I appreciate the thought.
Thank you. Our next question is, are NOAA grants with ecological environmental focus being targeted to be cut if they were BIL IRA funded?
I don't know. I think that it's possible, but so far the only list that I've seen of quote unquote targeted grants has come from EPA. And there's still not a ton of transparency about its like specific grants that are being targeted. I think this is an evolving issue, and so we will try to update the portal as much as we can. If folks aren't registered already for CPP, anybody that's working for a public agency or a nonprofit is able to sign up for free. We send out a weekly digest that we do try to update people and all of these things as they're evolving. It's really focused on federal climate funding updates. It won't really have anything specific to Pennsylvania unless there's like a specific grant case that's been canceled in Pennsylvania. But if you're looking for updates on things like NOAA, that is going to be a good outlet for that. So I'd recommend registering. I can drop the link in the chat.
Yeah, thank you for that. Our next question is being asked from somebody that's kind of wondering, you know, in the face of certain AGs that do not want to file lawsuits, like in Pennsylvania, is there something that people on the ground can do, the average citizen can do, maybe organizations, municipalities can do to encourage the state to take action to protect these programs that are, you know, coming down from the federal pipeline into the state, especially in the face of, like, you know, for example, the PA Attorney General not filing a lawsuit to do so? What can they do otherwise?
I can speak to what they could do with respect to direct pay. So I think like reaching out, if you know of a project that's happening or that's using either a grant or direct pay, I don't know if like the average citizen is going to be totally in the best position to do this, but if you're working on some of these projects themselves, like it can be helpful to meet directly with your local representative if possible, or write letters to the representative speaking to the benefits of those specific local projects. This is not, I guess, definitive, but what I've heard from the advocacy community in general is that being able to raise specific programs, projects that are happening in local communities has been one avenue that's been successful for advocating for these things. And a private citizen could certainly do that in a letter to their official. And then if someone's in the capacity to set up a meeting if they're part of those projects, that's a great idea as well, especially when representatives are back home, so to speak. But I would refer more, I think, to Zealand's slide from earlier. So if you get, when you get I know that these slides will be distributed once you get those, EPN and Zealand put together a nice one-pager or a nice slide in their deck that I would reference.
Yeah, thank you. This last question here is a bit more, I mean, slightly on the more personal side. given everything that's happening federally, is there any kind of like hope you can maybe give some people, especially individuals that kind of feel like things are moving really rapidly and a lot of funds that they rely on, either their municipality or their organization relies on, is constantly in flux? Do you see kind of hope in the horizon for these individuals and these organizations?
It's a big question. I think that the suite of lawsuits that we've seen come through is promising. It means that folks are not just sort of taking this laying down. I think that the GGRF funding is a good example of a grant recipient that is fighting tooth and nail to protect that funding. I think programs like Solar for All that have already been obligated, those are going to be really beneficial to each and every state that receives that funding. Same goes with the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Implementation Fund. These are already awarded obligated grant funding. I think that there's a lot of opportunity to continue to fight for those funds to be dispersed. And I would say the law is very much on the side of the grant recipients. And so I would continue to monitor and continue to follow those processes. But if and when, or if those are able to be protected in the long term, they'll be available to Pennsylvanians to do lots of different important projects within your state in the next few years, kind of regardless of what happens with the budget reconciliation process and the tax credits, which may or may not go away in after this year. Other glimpses of hope would be that for now, you can definitely still file and get a project supported by the tax credits and direct pay in 2025. Nothing leads us to believe that the tax law would ever be edited sort of retroactively. And so it's very, very much expected that any changes to the tax credits would not take place until 2026. And so one cause for hope or optimism would be, if you want a project done, get it done this year while that funding is definitely available, and then continue to advocate, call your representatives to see if we can preserve some of them, if not all of them. But I would look to the Solar for All and the CPRG implementation program in Pennsylvania. Those were huge wins that the folks that run those programs in your state fought really hard to get. And they're obligated funding. And so if they're able to protect them, they'll be available to you all.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. And thank you to Zealand as well for your very thorough explanations of these very complex topics that are ever changing, at this point, not even by the day, but by the second. So we greatly appreciate staying on top of this and sharing with us the information that you guys have.
Absolutely. There's a lot of hardworking experts that are fighting really hard, including EPN and Lawyers for Good Government, who are providing really wonderful services to folks that have received grants. But I would also just add that folks are not without a ton of support right now, I would say, in this space. So never forget that.
Thank you so much. Next slide, please. So here are some upcoming events that you might be interested in attending. As you can see here, on April 22nd, April 30th, and June 5th, which is our next SCDN Policy Connection. And to keep in touch with Sustainable Pittsburgh and all of our events coming up, you can go to sustainablepittsburgh.org/events. So thank you all for joining us. Please contact us if you have any questions or want to dig deeper into which federal opportunities exist for your organization. As mentioned before, we'll circulate the resources shared today and hope you'll reach out to us if you have any questions or want to learn more about federal funding and other opportunities to advance sustainability within your municipalities and organizations. Here's our contact information for myself and Sawyer. Thank you all for coming and hope to see you at our next SCDN Policy Connection.